The crackling of burning wood and the terrified screams echoed through the dark, narrow streets of Würzburg, a sound that haunted the nights of the early 17th century. Imagine the chilling spectacle: a small, defenseless figure, perhaps no more than 9 years old, dragged from her home, her desperate cries ignored by the very villagers who had once known her. Accused of unspeakable evils, of consorting with the devil himself, she faced not justice, but a fervent, terrifying mob convinced of her guilt. She was just a child, yet she was condemned to the most brutal of deaths. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover the horrifying truth about the Würzburg witch trials, a period of unparalleled terror where children became victims, executed by their own communities for a crime that existed only in the darkest corners of human fear and superstition, evidence that chroniclers of the time recorded with chilling dispassion, barely acknowledging the monstrous human cost. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. This wasn't some isolated ancient practice from distant lands. This was Germany. This was the heart of Europe. This was the height of religious fervor and burgeoning scientific thought. And what I'm about to reveal will completely shatter your understanding of how mass hysteria, fueled by power and paranoia, could consume an entire society and sacrifice its most innocent members. The early 17th century, particularly the years between 1626 and 1631, saw the Prince-Bishopric of Würzburg descend into an unparalleled reign of terror. It began with the consent of Prince Bishop Philipp Adolf von Ehrenberg, who, driven by a fervent desire to purify his lands and consolidate Catholic power, unleashed a brutal campaign against perceived heresy and witchcraft. Imagine the fear, the sound of cartwheels in the night, heavy and creaking, pulling nameless victims towards their fiery doom. Imagine the oppressive silence that fell over a village after an arrest, broken only by the distant clatter of an official's boots. The sudden disappearance of neighbors, the whispers of torture and forced confession, became the terrifying rhythm of daily life. Children, like the 9-year-old girl, were not spared. In fact, Würzburg became infamous for the sheer number of children accused and executed. They were not seen as innocent victims, but as insidious agents of evil, their young minds allegedly corrupted by the devil, their small bodies capable of unimaginable maleficium or harmful magic. Think about that for a moment. While your biggest worry at 9 might have been school lessons or playing games in the sun, these children were grappling with incomprehensible accusations of demonic pacts, of spectral flights through the night sky, of the torment of their neighbors through unseen forces. Their futures weren't about growing up, about dreams of family or trade. They were about facing relentless interrogation, excruciating torture, and a terrifying, agonizing death by fire. But to understand how such unspeakable cruelty could be visited upon children, how entire communities could turn on their youngest and most vulnerable, we need to expose the rotting core of the witch craze that swept through parts of Europe, particularly the tormented lands of South Germany. This great witch hunt hadn't always targeted children with such intensity. Earlier trials often focused on elderly, marginalized women, those already on the fringes of society. But in places like Würzburg, the hysteria spiraled, a self-perpetuating engine of paranoia, consuming all levels of society, from powerful nobles and respected councilmen to the very young and the very old. Prince Bishop von Ehrenberg, in his relatively short 8-year reign, reportedly oversaw the burning of an astonishing 900 persons, a number that stands as a chilling testament to his fervent, destructive zeal. This staggering toll included members of his own court, such as his young nephew, 19 Catholic priests who had served their communities, and most horrifyingly, children as young as 7, accused not just of witchcraft, but of having intercourse with demons. These were not mere accusations. These were confessions, extracted under duress, then used to justify their monstrous deaths. Wait, it gets worse. The contemporary records, often meticulously kept by the very officials overseeing the executions, reveal a terrifying, bureaucratic precision to the horror. While they listed names and alleged crimes, They offered little in the way of compassion, regret, or even basic human empathy for the youngest victims. There was no recognition of their tender age, no consideration of their vulnerability. This was the terrifying environment in which children found themselves. Their innocence, far from being a shield, became a dangerous vulnerability. Their youth a fatal flaw in the eyes of zealous witch-finders who saw the devil's hand in every shadow. This was the brutal reality of a society consumed by fear, where fear itself was twisted into the ultimate justification for unimaginable atrocity. The villages and towns of Würzburg, far from being havens of community, became centers of escalating suspicion and profound betrayal. Neighbors turned against neighbor, friend against friend, fueled by rampant paranoia, devastating economic hardship, the lingering trauma of the 30 Years' War, and the relentless pressure of authorities demanding more and more confessions, more and more names. Accusations were common, often sudden and arbitrary, based on petty grudges, lingering resentments, or a desperate need to divert suspicion. Plots and counterplots for survival simmered constantly beneath the surface, a dangerous, unspoken undercurrent to daily life. Children in such times didn't play freely in the dusty streets or sun-dappled fields. They were monitored, their words scrutinized, their innocent games capable of being twisted into damning evidence of sinister pacts. Many child accusations, terrifyingly, came from other children, often under duress and the threat of torture themselves, or from adults trying to save their own lives by implicating their most vulnerable family members, like their own offspring. The 9-year-old girl, like countless others, would have learned the subtle, terrifying cues of witch hunt hysteria before she learned the full duties of childhood, the way the whispers intensified around certain families, the sudden, inexplicable arrests of family, friends, and trusted adults, the chilling silence that fell over a crowd when the execution cart rolled through the streets, carrying its latest condemned to the stake. She was a child caught in a world of adult paranoia, suddenly stripped of the trust and protection she should have been afforded by her community, her innocence eroding day by day under the suffocating pressure of an unfolding tragedy she could not possibly control or comprehend. Her education in survival became a cruel, real-time lesson in false accusations, unimaginable terror, and the ultimate, inescapable betrayal. But here's the detail historians don't want you to know. Meticulous lists of the executed, compiled by officials like the chronicler Franz Georg Speckner, exist, and hidden within them is a chilling narrative of widespread child victimization that defies belief. These stark records mention a little girl 9 or 10 years old, a younger girl, her little sister, both burned, a boy of 10 years of age sent to the flames, and 2 girls of 12 years old among the condemned. This wasn't merely an unfortunate consequence of a zealous hunt, it was a systematic inclusion, a public stripping of their childhood and their lives to serve the brutal, insatiable machinery of the witch hunt. Even their age, which in any sane society should have protected them, was cynically used against them, presented as proof of the devil's cunning in corrupting the pure. Their brief taste of life was merely a cruel preparation for this ultimate, public extermination, a fate that beggars belief. This act was a chilling testament to the lengths that fear and misguided religious zeal would go, fundamentally undermining the very concept of justice and compassion when it conflicted with raw, unbridled fanaticism. It was a spiritual assassination of their right to exist, a perversion of any moral code. In the grip of this feverish period, the process of accusation and condemnation was swift and merciless. Once suspicion, however slight, fell upon an individual, interrogation began. Imagine these young children, innocent and bewildered, facing hardened inquisitors, likely grim-faced clergymen and stern magistrates who were utterly convinced of the devil's pervasive influence, seeing his hand in every misfortune, every unexplained event. They were interrogated not with gentle questioning designed to elicit truth, but with relentless psychological pressure, terrifying threats against themselves and their families, and sometimes the agonizing implements of torture. Records from other German trials, mirroring the practices of Würzburg, reveal that children were indeed subjected to various forms of lesser torture or extreme psychological coercion, designed not to uncover facts, but to break their will and force fabricated confessions. They were urged to confess their supposed pacts with the devil, to describe their imagined attendance at witches' sabbaths, to detail horrifying sexual encounters with demons, and, most cruelly, to name others, often their own parents, siblings, or innocent neighbors. These were not willing confessions born of guilt. They were the desperate, incoherent capitulations of terrified, exhausted young minds, unable to withstand the relentless pressure and pain. The goals were clear, though veiled in pious pronouncements of purification: to root out evil from the community, to purify the land through fire, and in doing so, to solidify the power of the Prince Bishop and his fiercely anti-Protestant, pro-Catholic agenda. Every confession, however fantastical, every new name extorted, fueled the fire, adding to the growing, horrifying list of victims and accelerating the pace of the terror. The mechanics of these trials are where this story turns from religious fervor to truly monstrous. Imagine these zealous men, masters of terror and manipulation, systematically extracting confessions from the most vulnerable members of society, including children, for their own perceived gain or to maintain their frenzied campaign. The children were ruthlessly isolated, ostensibly claimed to be for their salvation, or to separate them from their demon-possessed families, but in reality, to maximize their vulnerability. They were questioned about impossible acts, flying on brooms to meet the devil, attending unholy witches' sabbaths, transforming into animals, casting evil spells. The very illogicality and fantastical nature of the accusations, so clear and absurd to us now, was presented as undeniable proof of profound demonic influence then. The more outlandish and impossible the confession, the more truthful it was deemed by the deluded inquisitors, serving as further evidence of the devil's power. They were talking about the systematic dehumanization of children, state-sanctioned, religiously sanctioned terror, executed with cynical, almost clinical, precision. Every step was deliberate, every question a poisoned arrow, aimed directly at the children's souls and, ultimately, their lives. The final betrayal was struck not in a single act of judgment, but in the relentless, horrifying progression of these burnings. The 9-year-old girl, like hundreds before her, would have been condemned after her confession, her fate a foregone conclusion. She was now trapped, transformed in the public eye not into a child, but into a demon in human form, her innocence obliterated by ruthless accusation and the collective delusion of her community. This was a triumph of fear and fanaticism over any semblance of reason, morality, or empathy. The ramifications of these widespread burnings, the decimation of entire families, leaving orphans and broken survivors, the economic ruin of communities as skilled individuals and landowners were executed, the enduring psychological scars on those who witnessed or participated in the terror would haunt Würzburg for generations, a legacy of shame and unspeakable cruelty. The dark shadow of such horrors casts a long, chilling pall over any romanticized view of this period of European history. But they saved the cruelest detail for last. These children were not quietly executed in the privacy of a prison. They were put to public spectacle, their deaths a gruesome warning, a grotesque form of entertainment for the terrified populace. Their small bodies were led to the stake, often in batches, sometimes side by side with their parents or siblings, their final moments a horrific public performance designed to instill fear and reinforce obedience. They were simply removed from life, their disappearance a chilling testament to the power of public terror and strategic example. Their lives were consumed by fire, their desperate cries swallowed by the roar of the flames, by the chanting of prayers, by the silence of complicit onlookers. What were their last moments like? The right to their freedom, their names, their very existence were all stripped away. They were consigned to oblivion with the flicker of a flame and the chilling silence of a complicit village. This wasn't just about purifying a community. It was about eradicating a perceived threat so completely that it left no doubt, no room for questioning, no martyrs, no rallying points for future dissent. It was about removing any lingering fear that the devil might still hold sway by demonstrating the brutal power of the authorities. The very concept of justice, of human sanctity, was utterly obliterated in the face of such relentless, all-consuming fear and fanaticism. When they dragged the 9-year-old girl to the stake, she would have believed it was her agonizing end, just as the accusers and the preachers had proclaimed. She was a child, clinging to the fading hope of intervention, a last glimmer of light in the deepening shadows of the pyre. Can you imagine the bewildered confusion as the preparations for her execution proceeded with grim efficiency? The horrified stares of villagers, some perhaps even her neighbors, her playmates' parents, now convinced she was truly evil. The endless, agonizing wait as the torch was brought closer, for the flames to consume her, replaced by absolute, visceral terror that no words can truly capture. She was surrounded by the grim spectacle of the pyre, its wood stacked high, its hungry flames licking at the air, yet isolated by the terrifying universal condemnation of her entire community. Her questions, if she could voice them through her terror-choked throat, might have been simple. About her mother, about her favorite toys, perhaps even why everyone hated her so. The answers, veiled in shouts of damnation and the merciless crackle of fire, would have ultimately been cruel, final, and utterly incomprehensible to her dying mind. The new regime, under Philipp Adolf von Ehrenberg, threw itself into this purification with ruthless efficiency. While no lavish preparations for the children themselves occurred, for they were now inconvenient demons, not future citizens, the city was consumed by the fervent, almost insane, energy of the hunt. Every act, every public execution, every sermon from the pulpits was designed to legitimize the purge, to erase any doubt about the devil's tangible presence and the need for his eradication. The very fabric of society pulsed with the chilling urgency of a sacred crusade, a stark contrast to the quiet, unimaginable terror of the innocent victims. No one wrote verses of sorrow, no elegies were composed for the children now condemned to the pyre. The sheer spectacle of the burnings served as a powerful, chilling display of religious zeal and absolute civic control, a performance designed to impress and intimidate rather than to serve true justice or compassion. Every accusation, every confession extracted through suffering, every life extinguished, was presented as a symbol of the authorities' righteousness. A brutal position attained at the ultimate cost of countless innocent lives. In those grim years, the streets of Würzburg became a macabre procession route, the air heavy with the acrid scent of smoke and the stench of burning flesh. The children, along with other victims, were seen less and less frequently, their faces replaced by new accusations and new faces on the execution carts. Their very existence became a dangerous, forbidden topic for discussion, a name whispered only in the darkest corners of homes. They were curiosities no longer, but horrifying examples, a permanent scar on the communal memory. Their days in the prison would have been strictly monotonous, filled with quiet despair, their only companions perhaps each other, or the hardened, unsympathetic guards. Their lessons, if they had any, would have ceased, replaced by the grim reality of their confinement and the horrifying anticipation of their end. They were taught nothing but the bitter lesson of human cruelty and the unforgiving nature of mass hysteria. The physical toll must have been immense as well. Children, especially when subjected to brutal interrogation and prolonged confinement, are prone to illness, malnutrition, and profound psychological breakdown. Did they grow weak? Did they hallucinate? Did they call for their mothers in the dead of night? These heartbreaking questions linger in the void of definitive answers, lost to the deliberate silence of the records. I've got 3 more shocking revelations coming up about how mass hysteria consumed children in other witch hunts. But before we continue, if you're finding this hidden history as disturbing as I did when I uncovered it, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. I release new investigations every week, exposing the dark truths about historical figures. And trust me, Würzburg's story is just the beginning of what the history books don't want you to know. No one mentioned their increasing frailty, their probable fear, or their desperate pleas for mercy, for a moment of human kindness. Their tormentors, driven by zeal, by fear of accusation themselves, or by twisted ambition, would have observed their slow decline, their fading hopes, utterly unmoved by their suffering. The authorities deliberately silenced any murmurs of doubt, cultivating a narrative of righteous purification, a chilling, dehumanizing narrative, as if these children had simply ceased to be human beings and were, indeed, demonic entities. Official records became blank, where their innocence should have been, purged of any reference to their true nature, their brief lives. Any whisper of their innocence, any inquiry into the justice of their fate, was considered an act of heresy, a dangerous challenge to the very foundation of the hunt. This deliberate lack of compassion, this systematic dehumanization, is perhaps the most damning evidence of all, speaking volumes about the depravity of the witch craze. Meanwhile, the campaign continued, but it was fraught with internal and external pressures. The sheer scale of the executions, the inclusion of prominent citizens and increasingly of young children, began to breed deep unease, even among some of the executioners and officials. Rumors circulated. Was this truly justice, or something far more sinister and out of control? These questions became a persistent, poisonous thorn in the side of the authorities, a silent condemnation that no amount of public burning could truly silence. Their parents, if they survived the purges, undoubtedly lived in agony, their very existence a testament to the murdered innocents, desperate for understanding, for an end to the terror, for a moment of peace. Their grief, a private torment, was a testament to the public horror, a constant reminder of the human cost of fanaticism, a wound that would never truly heal. The constant anxiety and uncertainty must have weighed heavily on the entire region until the craze finally exhausted itself, its fury spent. Then, around 1631, the fires began to die down, partly due to the escalating 30 years war-shifting focus, diverting resources and attention, and partly due to sheer exhaustion and growing unease, even among the most zealous witch hunters. But the aftermath was chilling. There are no records of apologies, no monuments to the executed children, no public mourning. They simply vanished into the brutal history, their lives incinerated and forgotten. The most widely accepted truth is that they were indeed burned alive, their lives extinguished in a horrific display of communal madness. Their bodies, if collected, were disposed of, denied proper burial or Christian rites, as they were deemed heretics. Their young lives, caught in the grip of irrational fear, were swallowed by the machinations of hysteria. This deliberate act of erasure ensured their story would forever be a haunting question, a dark stain on the tapestry of European history, a chilling reminder of humanity's capacity for self-inflicted terror. Their disappearance, at such a tender age, highlights the sheer ruthlessness of a society consumed by irrational fear, an era where accusations superseded all reason, where paranoia was held by any means necessary, and where the most vulnerable paid the ultimate price. The lack of compassionate records, the calculated silence, the pervasive terror, all reveal a desperate attempt to maintain order through terror and to enforce a rigid, unforgiving ideology. Their lives were an accusation against the darkness of the age, their deaths a terrifying convenience, their only legacy, a chilling warning from history etched in the collective consciousness. The 9-year-old girl and countless other children in Würzburg were murdered, not with a sword or poison in private, but with accusation and the inferno of communal delusion. Not in a day, but across weeks and months of systematic terror and horrifying public display. Their childhoods were murdered by fanaticism, their innocence by forced confessions, their very existence by a desperate need for scapegoats, for someone to blame for the inexplicable misfortunes of life. They left behind no progeny, only a haunting question that resonated for centuries, a dark cloud hanging over the human conscience. The cycle of fear-driven violence where children became expendable scapegoats continued because that's what cycles do when no one stops them. But we can stop romanticizing these dark chapters. We can call them what they were: child victims of state, sanctioned murder, innocent human beings sacrificed for the convenience of power and dogma, the utter destruction of purity in the name of a twisted justice. The next time someone tells you about the grand narratives of European history, about the supposed enlightenment of the era, tell them about the children of Würzburg. Tell them about the 9-year-old girl burned alive by her own village. Tell them about the silence that swallowed hundreds of young lives whole, erasing them from the historical record. Tell them about the enduring horror of mass hysteria and ultimate betrayal. That's the real witch hunt era. That's the truth behind the pious proclamations and the relentless zeal. That's the horror we've spent centuries trying to forget, to gloss over, to explain away with convenient fictions. But these children deserve to be remembered, not just as numbers in a grim tally, but as human beings who should have been protected and weren't, as innocents who should have lived and were instead sacrificed, as lives extinguished before they truly began, their potential utterly obliterated. Their names, often lost to history, should be remembered. Victims of a world that saw children as vulnerable targets for its darkest fears. One was 9 years old, proclaimed a witch, and nobody saved her. That's the horror that should haunt us, not ghosts or monsters or things that go bump in the night, but the real horror of real people doing unconscionable things and calling it divine will, calling it necessity. The children of Würzburg, remember their names, remember their story, and remember that the only thing necessary for such evil to flourish is for good people to look away and call it history. The young lives consumed by the flames deserve at least that much. If the story of the Würzburg witch trials shocked you, you need to see what happened to other young figures caught in the ruthless grip of mass hysteria. I've uncovered more suppressed historical truths. Subscribe for more investigations, and I'll see you in the next one.